you were at pains to emphasise yesterday you're energy agnostic, which you've said before, of course. It's about switching horses in this race to reduce emissions. There is a big investment, though, in gas, in unlocking gas supplies, in pipelines as well. It does appear to lock in gas as the transition fuel, so that part's not so much agnostic, is it?
Well, we need a balance in our energy system, Tom, and that's the point I've been making since I became Energy Minister. We need coal, we need gas, we need solar and wind, we need our traditional hydro assets, and we're expanding those, and we need each of them to play a role. I mean, it's balanced energy systems that get an outcome. It's true that because of the way the gas market has worked in Australia, there's been less gas than you see in many other countries like the UK and the US, despite the fact that we're the biggest exporter of LNG, liquefied natural gas, in the world. So that has been an imbalance, which we're seeking to address through a series of reforms. And we certainly see that gas has the potential to replace the 1,000 megawatts of capacity we're losing at Liddell in the Hunter Valley. So, but ultimately there does need to be a balance, and gas balances renewables extremely well because gas can be switched on and off very quickly. We're seeing record levels of investment in solar and wind. And as we look forward to the future, these technologies that we described yesterday, the priority technologies as well as other technologies that can support them, are absolutely crucial to seeing that we have strong jobs growth, strong economy, and at the same time bringing down emissions. And the key to this is making sure those technologies come down in cost to parity with their higher emitting alternatives, and that way they can come into our energy system and into our industries, ensuring that we drive jobs growth and productivity and investment, and not destroying jobs as taxes would.
I know there's no line through coal, but it seems very small, any chance of new coal-fired power. Do you think some of your colleagues that have been pushing for this, it's easier to hear from you as the Energy Minister that this is not an emphasis, given they know you don't have an ideological issue with coal?
Well, I don't have an ideological issue with any energy. I mean, energy sources and fuel sources and technologies are not ideological, Tom. They're just solutions that can deliver outcomes. And the outcome we want is jobs growth, investment, strong economy, particularly as we come out of coronavirus, strong manufacturing, agriculture, industry, transport, these critical sectors. And, of course, coal is part of the mix and will continue to be part of the mix for many years to come, not just in Australia but around the world. We'll see the balance shift. It's shifting now. I mean, one of the fastest growing fuel sources around the world is gas because of the role it can play in our energy system, not just in electricity, but as an industrial feedstock for critical products like plastics, fertiliser, even pharmaceuticals. So it's crucial that we have that balance. Coal is part of the balance, will remain so for many years.
So, yeah, many years. And I think the last one would be at this stage scheduled to exit the market in 2048. Is there any mechanism, or would you look at any mechanism that retires coal-fired power early if it can be replaced with, for example, renewables that are firmed and the price is either the same or better? Is there any sort of mechanism that makes that happen here, or do those coal-fired power plants at this stage just go to end of life?
Well, the mechanism is the market, Tom. The mechanism is the market. We believe in that working as it should. Now, there's natural nameplate.
The market as in just the cost.
Final dates when the companies who own those assets expect them to close. That's not always the date where they will close. I mean, Liddell's been extended beyond that date already. But look, you know, we're not into the process of centrally planning every electricity generator in Australia. That's not going to work. We've actually got to allow private sector making its own investments as appropriate. But what we do need to do is make interventions where there is a failure. And it's clear there have been failures. It's clear there hasn't been enough dispatchable generation built in the electricity market, which is why we're investing in a replacement, if we have to, for whatever capacity is not filled when Liddell leaves the market. But we also need to make sure there's enough investment happening in R&D in emerging technologies, whether it's soil carbon, carbon capture and storage, energy storage technologies, hydrogen. These are all technologies which offer enormous potential, and we will continue to, as we said yesterday, invest $18 billion committed. We want to see matching, more than matching commitments from private sector and others. We expect upwards of $50 billion to be invested in these important technologies in the coming years, and they have the potential to drive 130,000 jobs through to 2030.
So there's also a line in the plan, and I know this is a ballpark figure, if you like, so I'm not trying to say there's, you know, an exact number that necessarily the government would be held to, but 250 million tonnes of CO2 will avoid being going out into the atmosphere annually by 2040. It mentions technology here, but also exports. So how much of that 250 million tonnes would be Australia's emissions, avoiding those emissions within Australia by the year 2040?
Well, it's a mix of both, but at the end of the day, you've got to remember that the outcome here that's got to be achieved is a global one. Australia is 1.3% of global emissions, and so it's the global outcome that counts here. And this is another important point about this roadmap. So if you look at those 5 technologies, they have potential to bring down emissions and strengthen economic outcomes in 90% of, in sectors which are responsible for 90% of the world's emissions, not just Australia's. And this is a crucial point. The way we're actually going to solve this problem is the way humans have always solved hard problems, through ingenuity and innovation, enterprise, and that is the approach we're taking in this roadmap, to say that there's some priority technologies, we can play a lead role, they'll bring down Australian emissions, but they'll also bring down global emissions, and that is the ultimate objective here that counts.
But this has obviously been a lot of work into this, a lot of experts involved. The 250 million figure, surely they must know how much is Australian emissions if you're going to come up with that figure. It wouldn't just be, if you know, I understand there'd be an export element as well, but how much would be Australian emissions?
Well, it's a mix of both. I mean, a large proportion of it is Australia. But when we send, I'll give you an example of how this plays out. But what are we talking about, 200
million and 50 or 50-50?
Well, it's a good proportion, and we'll be putting out more detail on some of these, on the submissions that we received and so on.
The split
in the
will be
coming
revealed.
Weeks. So you'll see some of that
revealed.
detail, Tom. You'll see some of that detail. But the point I would make is this, that the role we play in reducing emissions around the world is a crucial part of this overall story. We do it now. I mean, we have created the largest LNG, liquefied natural gas, export sector in the world. That's been great for Australia, for job creation, for our economy, particularly in Queensland. We've seen an enormous number of jobs created from it. But we're also reducing emissions in places like Japan and Korea and China by exporting our gas, which has lower emissions than alternative fuel sources. And so that's an extremely important part of this story. I remind you, again, Tom, you heard it from me many times yesterday when I gave the Press Club speech, the goal here is global emissions reduction. It is meaningless.
No, I understand that. I'm not saying it's not a good thing to have an overall target, but I'm just trying to, you're saying there will be an Australian amount, so you'll clarify how much that 250 will be onshore in Australia. So at that point, and I'll just throw a figure out, and I know you'll say, well, you know, we'll see what it is, but if it is 200, at that point, we would have, in effect, by 2040, not necessarily a target of what the coalition will achieve in emissions reduction, but a minimum amount. And you can work out from there, whether it's 60% or so, that could be a ballpark figure, what the coalition will achieve, even if it's not yet a mandated or legislated target.
Well, they're just the 5 priority technologies, Tom. There's many other technologies that are reducing
right, that's
emissions
what I'm saying. That'd be a minimum
now that are not in those 5. So, I mean, I think what you're trying to do there is, you know, yes, it's true, and you're quite right in saying that the 5 priority technologies can have a very big impact on emissions reduction, can create export industries, can create jobs. But there are other technologies, some of which are very mature. I mean, solar has been maturing dramatically in the last 10 years. If you look back at where we were in 2010 with solar versus where we are today, it's night and day. Quite literally, we're seeing an extraordinary impact from solar. And we'll continue to, and that's not in those numbers you've described there. So, look, the point I'd make, though, is if you look at the sectors,
let me just,
the critic...
so let me just say this, Tom, I mean, the point I'm actually getting to is, before you even add anything else into, we could be looking at 60% plus. That would seemingly make, say, 70% emissions reduction by 24 really achievable. And people might be surprised at the ambition or the achievement of the coalition. I'm actually suggesting perhaps the other side.
bringing these technologies to the sort of economic outcomes we described tomorrow, the stretch goals that we yesterday, the stretch goals that we laid out yesterday, is ambitious and it will have a big impact. But the biggest impact of all will be job creation and strengthening the economy at the same time as bringing down emissions. And
right.
the intuition of this, the obvious point to make here, Tom, is if you look at the sectors we're targeting here, whether it's agriculture, manufacturing and industry more generally, of course the electricity sector. I mean, these are the sectors that are not just a big part of our economy, they're also where the current emissions are. And so if these technologies are successful, as we're seeking for them to be, then it will have a very big impact. And that's why we've chosen those priority technologies.
I appreciate your time sticking around today, Minister Angus Taylor. Thank you.